Next, we have Natalie Millman.
No, I do not. Okay. All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mariana, for a wonderful presentation. That was really a good way to start the day, broadening our horizons. So thanks. So, moving on. There was a movie that came out in December. Anyone know what I'm talking about? The one where Anne Hathaway won an Oscar for her tears? Yeah, Les Mis! You know what I'm talking about. What a great movie. Of course, it's kind of bidirectionally relevant to us as social workers, too. I mean, we are aware of the catch-22 that is life post-incarceration. You either stay in prison and get treated inhumanely, or, great other option, you leave prison and get treated inhumanely. Wow. So, it's a damned if I do, damned if I don't cycle. I mean, no wonder people have difficulty getting out of a cycle of desperation, poverty, substance abuse, and crime. They're disempowered by those with privilege. And you know what? We as social workers can't do everything that we want to do. We can't do what the priest does in Les Mis. We can't give our entire collection of silver to every person who needs it so that they can start a new life. We only have so many silver candlesticks to give. But of course, we can't be like the policeman Javert either, aligning our egos to systems that don't care about us or about our clients. Not only can that lead to disaster as it does for the poor policeman in the story, but I don't think any of us wants to be a Javert figure. Privileged people, employed with the job of chasing down less privileged people, engaging in massive power struggles, focused on trying to get all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. But wait a minute, isn't that what we spend a lot of our time doing anyway? Trying to get all the I's dotted and the T's crossed? Oops. So that leads to the question, how can we work for these frustrating, disempowering systems that seem like they want to squeeze out every drop of compassion and love that we want to share with our clients and extinguish the inner faith that motivates us? Because, as I'm sure many of you know, it's a reciprocal relationship. Agencies that treat their staff well treat their clients well too, and vice versa. When those things don't go together, it keeps us from advancing the greater good. I'm clearly very nervous. I wish I could say that things were different, but unfortunately, from what I hear, many agencies don't treat their staff well. And this impacts the quality of the services provided to clients. When power is unequal, the privileged few gain more control, and those who lack privilege are disenfranchised. Many of these systems crush our clients, telling them that they don't have souls. And you know what? Even as though many of us are privileged to be gears in these systems, we are often told the same thing. We don't have power. So we're faced with the question, how can we, as social workers, encourage our clients to win back power for themselves? And at the same time, how can we win back power for ourselves too? I don't have a definitive answer to these questions, but I have a couple of ideas if I can turn my page. My idea is that we can approach our clients from the perspective of personal history. Now, what does it mean to be practicing personal history or being a personal historian? In a nutshell, a personal historian is someone who assists people in documenting their life stories, whether that be through organizing family photographs, leading storytelling groups, or helping them write their autobiographies. They can also do genealogy, archival work, research, and anything else a historian employed by a museum or university might do, but they don't do their work on big projects or major figures. They do it on everyday people like you and me. Now, that doesn't really explain how I help my clients, or try to help my clients. What I mean to say is, I try to treat every client with whom I interact like I am documenting their life story for posterity, even if I'm not actually writing it down. Because the way I see it, their story is becoming a part of my story, and vice versa. The way I interact with them and the way I elicit their stories either allows their story to grow and become more complex and developed, or, depending on my manner, I can stunt its growth. If I listen to someone, it gives them power, but I can't give them power if I don't have any of my own. The goal of this presentation is to convince you that you do have some power, even in an agency that leaves you feeling desperate, disenfranchised, and alone. More power than you imagine. And you can use that power and give some to your clients. This is something I've learned this year at my own unhappy field placement. Personal history work involves giving power to the clients by observing and preserving the past and allowing them to reframe their narrative in a new way. It can lead to wisdom and growth. Instead of just repeating the same old story to another nameless face who doesn't really care, who is just writing the story down for the client's chart, I try to be as engaged and present and mindful as possible, despite circumstances that inhibit this. I try to give them power in the therapeutic relationship that they won't otherwise get. I won't say I'm perfect at applying this, not at all, but this is what I aspire to do. So I've isolated 3 concrete skills that if you take just 1 or 2 of them away, I hope it will help your own personal practice. So number 1, as you've probably heard before, history is written by the victors. So by treating your client's story with the respect and dignity that of a historian documenting an important person or experience, you can make the client feel like they can impact the future. If they feel that they have changed history, that gives them power to impact the future. And that means they can make positive change for themselves and their community. They don't need to be president to do good work in the world. Number 2, don't ask so many questions. Full disclosure, this is a skill I attribute to Dr. Schweben's motivational interviewing class. So please, go to the seminar today on motivational interviewing. It is well worth it, and I highly recommend it. So basically, when you ask question after question after question after question of a client, your clients become fatigued, and that makes it more likely that they won't come back. So what can you do instead? Reflect on what they said. This doesn't mean, yeah, I see, blah, 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 blah. Don't be afraid to go ahead and say in a tone that is confident, so, that makes me feel paralyzed. Or, so, that makes me feel frustrated. Keep that questioning aftertone out of your voice. That tone where you're like, so, that makes you frustrated? Yeah? Yeah? You want to keep that out of your voice because it diminishes your own power and prevents the client from feeling more powerful as well. So let the client breathe. Remember, you are documenting and witnessing and helping them process their own experiences. You are not interrogating them. Leave that to the other systems. Number 3, at risk of sounding like I'm contradicting myself, be curious. People who practice personal history want to know more and find ways to accomplish that without making their clients defensive. So when you hear something that doesn't make sense, call the client out on it. In a nice social worker way, of course. So, I hear you are wanting to be a better father to your son. But I also see that you're spending a lot of time out drinking with your friends, so I'm confused. Can you explain to me how that works out for you? That's an example that Dr. Schweben uses in class, and he calls it the Columbo approach. It's fantastic. So please go to the seminar. It's really great. Basically, those are my tips. Treat your client as an agent who can change history. Don't interrogate your client, and be curious. Now, before I part, I have a few quotes from personal historians that are useful to us as social workers. Number 1, never doubt that you can change history. You already have. Marge Piercy. Number 2, the past actually happened, but history is only what someone wrote down. A. Whitney Brown. And number 3, as social workers, we can convert experience into wisdom and growth. Susan Wittig Albert. One last observation I would like to make. I started off talking about Les Mis, so I just want to point out that Victor Hugo, who wrote the book that the musical and the movie are based off of, was a historian. If you've ever read this book, you would also discover that there's about 100 pages dedicated to the history of the Battle of Waterloo and how it matters for a couple of characters. And he also spends almost the same number of pages writing about the history of the Paris sewer system. But he spends most of his 700-page book, which I've read, writing about the people in a biographical way. And it's fascinating because he spends a lot of time honoring those who are actually not important people in power. He spends most of the book writing about the disempowered, who are overlooked by the history books, people who we call the mentally ill, the physically ill, the impoverished, the homeless. And most of all, he highlights the difficulties of incarcerated people reintegrating into society, like Jean Valjean. We may think of Victor Hugo as just a writer of fiction, but ultimately he is a historian. We, too, can be historians in our line of work, raising our clients up by treating their stories as valuable and important, even if we're not writing them down. A personal historian approach involves being mindful, being empathetic, being socially conscious. A personal historian approach means that we can inspire change in those disempowered people who are labeled by these systems with numbers, allowing the 24601s to flower into Jean Valjean.